If we have to hire 700 math coaches, teachers, to teach math teachers how to teach Common Core, then there's a problem with Common Core, and it's got to go.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
This is going to be a special episode of the Valley Labor Report with Jacob Morrison and Adam Keller. And it's going to be, I think, like a continuing series. And it's going to be Politicians Suck. That is... And I think, Lew, I've seen some of your interviews, and you would agree with me on that. And you know, I think I'm going to title it that. Maybe I won't, maybe I will. But because we're abundantly clear on this show that what's going to make your life better is, generally speaking, not politicians. It's going to be self-organization, getting together with your brothers and sisters on the job and in your community to make, and that's going to make a much quicker, more immediate, and more effective way of making your life better. And additionally, if you do that, you come together, form a union with your brothers and sisters, that's going to make it so much easier to get the things that you want from politicians, because you're going to have that organizational muscle to make them do it, right? And that's what the show is all about. So I don't think anyone's going to be confused about us thinking that voting or not voting for this or that person is the end-all, be-all of political activism. But for better or worse, politicians have a lot of power in our lives, and it's election season. So we're going to have this as a semi-regular series outside of our main and overtime shows so that we don't miss any good stuff, where we're talking to basically any candidate that with some amount of relevance to the audience to help educate folks about their options when they go to the voting booth, and hopefully illuminating a few things that some other shows won't. So the first person that we're going to be doing this with is Lew Burdette. He is running for governor of the great state of Alabama. Lew, thanks for taking the time to join us. I appreciate it.
Jacob, thank you so much for having me, and I couldn't agree more. It wasn't. Politicians was not supposed to be a lifetime job, was it? And, you know, that's why I'm running, is we haven't had any change. In my entire lifetime, I'm 63 years old. People ask me all the time, why are you running for governor? Because I so dearly love this state, and we've been at the bottom my entire lifetime, and we have great people. We have a great state. We do not have to be at the bottom, but that's where lifetime politicians keep us in this state, is at the bottom.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's just a statement of fact, basically, from the record. But Lew, the first thing that I wanted to get into is that the first thing on your website, like if somebody goes to your website, which is lewin22.com, that's a pretty easy thing to say, lewin22.com. The first thing that you see about you is that you are a proven public company executive. And so, you know, this is something that you're proud of, right? That you believe is something that makes you more qualified maybe than not to be governor of Alabama. And this, I mean, it's, you know, it's so common you almost get sick of it, right? I'm a businessman. We need a businessman in office, blah, blah, blah. And like, for me, I have a difficult time understanding, like, why I, as a working person, would vote for a boss as an elected leader. You know, we asked folks to tell us their first thought when they hear the word business leader, and these are the responses that we got. We got grifter, someone who doesn't work, nothing good, thief, plutocrat, tyrant, right? And I think that tracks with a lot of people's lives, with going to work day in and day out. They're doing the work. The boss tells them that they aren't doing it good enough while they sit in their office and take all the credit while making more money than the rest of us. So tell me, like, why should I vote for a businessman as a working person?
Because that hasn't been my track record. My track record is growing up as in the family-owned grocery business. My dad owned a small-town grocery store. I learned a strong work ethic, sacking groceries in my dad's store from really about the earliest age I can remember. I was so little that I could take the groceries off the counter, put them in the sacks, and the big boys would have to take them out. And I saw my dad run a small business and work 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, his entire life. And so that's the environment that I grew up in. I'm an everyday working guy. And I say, I am so glad that I have spent my entire career with a real job in the real world. And nobody gave me my position when I worked at Books A Million. I worked there for 13 years, and I started out at the bottom, and I worked my way up to be chief operating officer and grew a chain of stores from 30 stores to over 175 when I left, from $26 million in volume and to $250 million in volume across 16 states, and a little over 200 employees to over 3,000 employees. And that kind of business experience, common sense business experience, is important to running this state, to know how to manage people, to know how to manage a multi-million-dollar budget. So nobody gave me anything. I worked hard, sometimes 100 hours a week when we were taking our company public back in that day. But then the last 19 years is running a nonprofit in Birmingham called King's Home, helping abused youth and moms and kids start over in life, have hope and opportunity in life. And so running a nonprofit is important, to have business common sense. And I think that's what we need is a change in Montgomery, away from lifetime politicians that have kept us in the bottom, to have a common sense business leader that will flip it upside down, that doesn't owe any favors. Nobody's got influence over me. And I can't wait to work for that kind of change in Montgomery.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your experience at Books A Million. You said that you were there. I don't know. You said you worked your way from the bottom. I don't know what specifically position you started at, but you said you were there for 13 years and you got there, and by the time you left, you were the chief operating officer. And I just, I looked around a little bit, and some of these sites, it's not like they're 100% accurate, but I think generally speaking, they're more or less in the ballpark. And Glassdoor says with very high confidence that the average starting wage for a Books A Million bookseller is $9 an hour. Indeed shows basically the same, with general managers making $13 an hour, shift leads making $11 an hour. PayScale is another one of these types of sites that show basically the same thing, with benefits specialists and management like general managers, retail managers having the opportunity to get up to $23 an hour. So, that seems to me to be not good, right? I mean, I couldn't imagine having to live on $9 an hour. Could you?
Oh, yeah, me either. But, I don't know what year that was referencing. I've been gone for 25 years from Books A Million. So I was with them from 1985, before we were ever called Books A Million, to 1998, the end of 1997. So I was there for 13 years. Had a great experience. We had a great team, and pay was probably in that range back in the 1980s and early 1990s. But like I said, I've been gone for 25 years, and the last 19 years I've spent at King's Home. And I know today at King's Home, where we're helping the residents that we have about 125 residents at any given time. And have residential group homes, direct care to help, like I said, the abused start over in life, find hope and opportunity. We can't hire anybody for that wage. We haven't hired anybody in that wage range in since the early 2000s, maybe. When I first came to King's Home, we even started at $10 or $11, and today it's $15 to $20 for direct care hourly positions starting out. And of course, our house parents and others in different levels of our organization make much more than that. So I can't speak to Books A Million because I've been gone for 25 years.
Gotcha. Okay, I see. I thought I was thinking that it was maybe a bit more recent. Those are numbers that are what it's like today. If you were to go and try to get a job at Books A Million, these are about the wages.
I would be shocked if they could hire anybody. Hey, McDonald's hires for $15 an hour. I would be shocked if anybody could be hired for any job. I'm not talking.
Well,
about,
I mean, there's a report that came out that in 2021. 40% of Alabamians made less. 40% of working Alabamians made less than $15 an hour, which is astounding.
And I'm sure that's true in rural areas because I swear, I grew up in rural Alabama, Randolph County, and Roanoke, and some of the more rural parts of Alabama. Maybe that's what the wage range is in some of those areas, and that's what I want to work to change. Also, is we got to improve education in Alabama. We can't be 52nd in math, 47th in education overall. And when we have better education, especially in the rural areas, because we have great schools in this state, but in the rural areas like where I grew up, our schools need a lot of help. They need a lot of change, and so that's one. We got to have education as the number one priority year after year until we raise up out of the bottom. And then we still got to keep it the number one priority, because unless we have better educated citizens, just like you're saying, we can't have better jobs. We can't have higher paying jobs. So I agree with you 100%, and that's got to be in all areas of Alabama, not just the metropolitan areas.
Okay, so let's talk about education. You mentioned that's one of your top priorities. What would be the Lew in22 education agenda? Take
out Common Core. Common Core's got to go. We can't be 52nd in math. We're 52nd in math, and they just passed a bill today. To me, that's just heartbreaking. Today in the legislature, they passed a bill, hadn't been signed into law yet. But I'm sure the governor's going to sign it, that they're going to hire 700 math coaches to teach college-degreed math teachers in our schools how to do Common Core math. If we have to hire 700 math coaches, teachers, to teach math teachers how to teach Common Core, then there's a problem with Common Core, and it's got to go. That would be my first priority. Then we got to budget right. 93% earmarking in Alabama, the highest earmarked state in America. The next closest is Michigan at a little over 60. That's got to change. We can't budget right. We can't budget right educationally. We got to have literacy programs that work to get our kids caught up in literacy. I was meeting with the mayor of Huntsville not long ago, and he said we have 400 job openings at Mazda, new automotive plant in the Huntsville area, pays $50,000 to $60,000 a year starting, great paying jobs, and we can't get enough applicants to fill the positions because they can't read an application at a third or fourth grade level. So we got to have literacy programs that get our kids caught up in reading, and have dual enrollment, not for college credit necessarily, but for vocational credit. And we need that throughout the state, to have dual enrollments so that we can get kids on a career path for success in high school. That would be another top priority. And then taking our community colleges and retooling them so that we are prepared for professional jobs coming out of high school. Professional jobs like electricians. I was talking with the owner of a big electrical company in Birmingham. He said, my master electricians can make over $100,000 a year, and I'm desperate for electricians. These are the kinds of career paths for great careers that our young people should be pursuing, because not every kid needs to go to a four-year college.
I think that we would definitely agree that we're very big fans of the trade union apprenticeship programs and the way that they do that, as opposed to the non-union apprenticeship programs, and the things that they are able to actually educate their apprentices about. I mean, the quality of work that you're going to be able to do coming out of a 4 or 5 year trade union apprenticeship program, as opposed to a 12-week, non-union apprenticeship program, is a lot different, and you can tell it in the wage differentials that you get between these non-union and the union trade jobs as well. It's something like, oh man, it was like 25 or 30, 40% of non-union trade workers are on government benefits, like they're on welfare. So let's talk about that in just a second.
And just the last point on education is right now big debate is on school choice, and I'm generally for school choice, but what I'm really for, because we have about 80 kids in our program throughout central Alabama at any given time. These are teenagers that come from horribly abusive situations. And a child's zip code should not determine their educational future. And I see a lot of our kids that come into King's Home where they have been in areas where school choice would have benefited them. But where I grew up in rural Alabama, school choice isn't a big deal because parents can't afford to drive their kids over to the next county for them to have an opportunity to go to a different school. But what I'm really for is a child's educational savings account that goes directly to the child. Funds are allocated so that parents don't have access to that money, but it's used specifically and strictly for education so that parents can make the choice for their particular area where their child would get the best education. Is it in public school? Is it homeschooling? Is it charter schools? Is it a private school? And so parents would have that kind of choice to make those decisions for their children, where they would have the opportunity to do that. So that's what I'm really for, is seeing us allocate educational dollars, part of our budget, that goes directly to the child so that there is real school choice for the parents and it's strictly used for that purpose.
Yeah, well, so I think that, Adam, I'm interested in what you've got to say, but we've talked about this a few times. We've talked about Del Marsh's bill a few times. And
I'm not for Del Marsh's bill. It's very similar to a lot of these other quote unquote school choice. I mean, they're really school privatization schemes, it seems to me, these vouchers, these things like that. And they don't seem to work. In Louisiana, after 2 years in the program, a student who started in the 53rd percentile dropped to the 37th percentile in math. By and large, those negative effects persisted through year 4, particularly in math and science. In Indiana, we saw initial dips in math that persisted for 4 years. An Ohio study showed that even after 3 years in the program, the negative impacts of using a private school voucher persisted. So, I mean, there are multiple studies that are showing that these quote-unquote education savings accounts, these school vouchers, they're not really working even for the people that use them. And, of course, it's not helpful for the people who are left behind to have their schools have less funding. And so, we do know some things that help schools perform well. We've got several schools in Alabama that are below the poverty line and actually have like test scores, which of course that's not everything, but they have test scores that are like higher than Mountain Brook. And the thing that we see across all these schools are that teachers have high expectations for students and they're invested in their students. Teachers take control. Teachers actually have control in their classroom. They have plentiful support to help teachers get better at both what they know and how to teach it. There's a constant assessment of where students stand and what they need help with, and they have strong community support. Like, that's not even necessarily funding. It's just making sure that teachers are empowered and that, that we're not out there demonizing and attacking teachers, and we're not trying to, send their students off to private schools and put money into the CEO of a private school's pocket. Right. And that's why I said, I gave you lots of different options where parents could not. I'm not an advocate for private schools. I'm an advocate for choices that make sense. That could be a charter school. That could be homeschooling. Maybe it is a private school, but or it could be another school within their own district. So that's where I think choices do make sense sometimes. I also agree with what you said. I met with the mayor of Thomasville, Alabama, in the Black Belt, and that was part of what he shared is how successful, how invested they are as a city into their school system, how they partner with their school system and support them, how they do have great teachers. And Jacob, you're exactly right. When you have communities like that get invested, want to make a difference, and the difference it can make. And one of the things that he talked about was the importance of dual enrollment and what that's meant to their students, where if they want to take college credit, they can, or they can also be in dual enrolled in career tech kind of jobs, vocational kinds of jobs, and they're on a career path to success. That's what I want to see statewide in all schools, and have opportunities for kids to have that kind of success.
Jacob, I was going to jump in here while we're on education. I'm a former educator and from a family of educators, and there's a couple of things here where I think we have some common ground. I definitely agree that more options for children in terms of the dual enrollment, because you're right that four-year college degrees not for everybody. There are some great jobs in the trades that are desperate for young labor. And so I think there's a ton of potential there for partnerships to funnel kids into these apprenticeship programs so that they can leave high school, enter a career, and make a good wage with a good pension, good benefits. And I think there's tons of opportunity to partner with our trade unions on that, because they know how to do it.
And our community colleges.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think
workforce development. Yep.
Yeah, so I think you could have more collaboration between all those entities to, increase the enrollment and to make sure that the folks who go through the program are well trained and know how to do the job correctly. I also agree that, a child's zip code should not be determinant of their academic opportunities or their success. I think when you look at the evidence, what we see in education is the outputs reflect the inputs. And the largest determinant of test scores in education is the student's socioeconomic background. And so until we as a state address poverty and lack of health care, lack of mental health, over-incarceration, and the many other issues that plague our state, and as you mentioned, we rank at the bottom of virtually everything. And so it is all connected, and our schools alone can't solve those issues because they can only do what they can with the children they take. And public schools do take all children, which is unique compared to, the private schools. But there were a couple other things I wanted to mention in terms of the earmarking. Historically, the reason why educators have been so resistant to the consolidation of the education trust fund with the general budget, or less earmarking overall, is because what we fear and what we found in other places is that when education doesn't have this dedicated funding sources and dedicated budget, dedicated revenue streams strictly for education, it is too tempting for legislators to take this combined budget and use it as an opportunity to slash education funding to put elsewhere. And while we have some pretty significant needs in our state for everything from our prison system, which is failing, to our transportation and infrastructure, it shouldn't come at the expense of school funding. And in terms of the education savings accounts, I do have to push back here because I agree, Jacob, you've laid it out there. We know that it's not effective or successful in the states where it has been tried. And we really don't take this kind of approach with any other aspect of public services. I don't get a savings account for public safety, for example, and get to take my money away from the local police force and buy my own security system. And it is kind of a bizarre thing for me to take that approach as a way to improve education, because ultimately, as you said, the zip code shouldn't determine that child's opportunities or their success. So the goal should be that every child has an excellent public education right there in their community. And I think if we take that as the number one goal, everything else sort of falls into place in terms of how we achieve that. If we start to look at ways where, a handful here and a handful there can benefit at the expense of the majority, because every child who leaves with this funding that's attached to them, that's less funding for their community school. And every child that leaves who has the parents with the means and opportunities to pull their child out, typically that's going to be some of your better performing students or your better behaved students. And so the folks left behind in the public school, the neighborhood community public school, it's going to be that much more difficult for them to be successful. So I think there's sometimes a rush to have these solutions in education that may work here and there for certain families in certain times and places at the expense of the majority. And ultimately, public education is all about the public, and it's all about ensuring that every child has the opportunity, but it's for the good of our whole society, because we do recognize, and I think you share this opinion, that ultimately the education of our community affects everything that we do. And it is better as a state to have a better educated public than it is to not. Everything from our economy to our civic society. So those are just a couple of my thoughts. I do agree.
100%. Yeah, I agree with you. And thank you for bringing up the poverty issue, because, again, that's where I grew up, in a poor county.
Right.
My cousin worked in the literacy program for the State Board of Education for years, finished her career there. And she's one of the first ones I called to talk to, because she spent her whole career as a teacher, and committed to literacy program and advancing reading in Alabama and getting kids caught up. And she, exactly what you said, Adam, is that it's not just an educational issue in Alabama. It's a family dynamic issue with what's going on at home with those kids and what kind of support they get at home. And I see that at King's Home with the 80 kids that we have
I can imagine.
Care, and what kind of support that we give our kids. And it's also the poverty issue that you brought up, that is all of that wrapped up, because if you got chaos at home and you got poverty at home, and the kid is coming to school with all of that baggage and coming to school hungry, and hadn't been fed really over the weekend sometimes, that those are real issues across the rural areas of Alabama. And I agree 100% that we have to have programs that work to advance education for all kids in this state. And if some of these programs work in some areas, but we got to make sure that we're promoting and helping kids in all areas. That's why I said school choice doesn't work in all areas. That's why I'm not this big, huge advocate of school choice. And I said that at the beginning. It doesn't work in rural areas. So we have to have different programs in the rural areas to help specifically help those kids. And that's why I use Thomasville as an example, of a community that is committed to getting behind their school system and partnering with them and supporting them. And the advances that they've made have really been phenomenal. And I applaud communities like Thomasville that are in the Black Belt that get a lot of knocks along the way for, if it wasn't for the Black Belt, that we wouldn't be 47th in education. Well, we're still 47th in education, and what we've been doing hadn't worked. So we got to try some new things to move this state forward.
Well, I'm interested in obviously for education and for any issue, you're going to be talking to experts once you get in. You're not going to be able to have every single thing laid out. And I'm interested in who you're going to be going to for some of these things, because in my mind it would seem like, okay, the people that we talk to are the people that do the work, and obviously, I am happy to say, I'm happy to admit my bias that I'm a working person, I'm a union person, but just generally speaking, for any job, it seems like the people that know how best to do the work and know what needs to be done to do the work better are the people that do the work. And so I'm a bit concerned about your position or your stance towards organizations like the AEA, because they're the teachers, right? The AEA is the organization of teachers. And in other podcasts, you've said we've got to have somebody who's going to stand up and fight the AEA and take away teacher tenure. And so these are things that coming in right off the bat saying, like, my position towards teachers is that I'm going to be oppositional to them seems worrying to me.
I want to work with AEA. Everywhere I go, I talk about bringing unity to Alabama, not division. I think there are elements of tenure that I feel like that there should be ways to clean up teachers that aren't achieving high results in their classrooms, and there is a way to have improvement in those kinds of classrooms, because those do hold kids back. That's not doing the right thing for kids. If teachers specifically, just like any other job, just like the job that you have, I'm sure you have great folks that produce at a very high level, and you got other folks that don't. And, we should always
Well, I mean, tenure has already been, and Adam can speak more to this if he'd like, but tenure has already been watered down significantly in the state of Alabama. And basically all it is at this point is a sort of due process, which, to be fair, many other workers in the state do not have, because we're an at-will employment state. And, your boss can come in upset in the morning and fire you for any reason or no reason at all. And that's not the case with teachers. Your boss, your principal, your superintendent actually does have to have a reason, but as long as they document it and they show the harm that is coming to students and the community because of their inaction or whatever actions, it's not actually that difficult to fire a teacher, right, Adam?
Oh, it's not. I was personally involved in a couple dozen of these type of cases where tenured educators were terminated. They had no chance of appeal except for on procedural matters. I personally never saw a single one that won their case because once it got to that point, the school district did have the evidence, and they felt the superintendent, of course, felt positive. They had a majority support on the school board. So I think,
and that's another thing that
I think a lot of the opinions about tenure and the rhetoric around tenure
don't really map onto reality.
Well, it's not in touch with how it is now, particularly after 2011 when the GOP-led legislature did reform it, as you mentioned. So I think there were there's some pretty major differences between the current tenure law and the old one prior to 2011 and prior to the Republican takeover of the legislature. It was much more difficult to terminate employees back then. But in listening to your comments, I'm going to suggest we probably have one area of common ground on this, which is, in terms of working with folks to improve performance, as it stands now, the law does not require the school district to actually do that before termination. So if you take, for example, a teacher who's been there 10 years and, the last couple of years, the principal feels like they've been slipping, the performance is not up to snuff, they don't actually have to coach this teacher. They don't have to put a written performance plan into place that with certain benchmarks and professional development. Now, those are best practices, and those are things that I personally advocated for in Huntsville, and I know other school districts attempt to do that. But that's one area where perhaps we could find some common ground in revising the way tenure is applied in the state, is that If a school district feels strongly enough that a teacher is on the pathway to deserving termination, they should feel strongly enough to try to, improve that performance and salvage not just the career, but, what's happening in the classroom in the meantime as this process plays out.
And I think that's where Mississippi's done a good job of professional development for teachers. I think that's where they've surpassed us in the last 5 or 6 years. We can't say thank God for Mississippi anymore. They're not 52nd in math. We are. And so
as a Mississippi native, I got to say that concerns me when we're battling back and forth for last place. And if Mississippi's passing us, we got some catching up to do.
But I do want professional development for teachers. I want to partner with AEA. I want to partner with teachers. I want to incentivize teachers who do have great performance in the classroom and bonus them that way, that they get extra incentives when they excel and perform, and that's measurable in the classroom and their kids are excelling. I want programs like, we got Teach America programs, Adam, I'm sure you're familiar with. Well, let's have Teach Alabama programs where we're incentivizing young teachers out of college and we incentivize them to go to rural areas, and they view it as a service, that they get a 3 to 5 year commitment, and we bonus them to go to our rural schools and pour life into these kids. That's the kind of advances that I would like to see in education and support our schools and support our communities so that we're partnering and helping. And I think AEA would be, I think they would be very positive to those kinds of things. I think they would like to have incentive programs so that their teachers could make more money when they perform at high levels in the classroom. I think that's what we want for all teachers, and we want it for all kids. And let's support teachers developmentally also in their careers.
Yeah. As we are, we're coming up on where you've got another event here pretty soon, so I appreciate your time. Want to be respectful of that. If you would stay just a little bit longer, I did want to get your thoughts on the mine workers.
Is it okay if I'm going to have to jump in a car? It may get a little bit loud. Is that okay?
No issue with me.
Okay. I can't see if I could see how. I'm not sure how. I can't. Usually I can mute. And okay, I got it. I may mute it while I transfer, but I'm still listening and I'm still going to respond. But
okay.
I'm going to mute so that it's not a bunch of background noise.
All right. Sounds good. I appreciate it. So the last thing that I wanted to make sure that we got to, and time flies when you're having fun. We didn't get to everything that I wanted to, but maybe down the road, especially if you win the primary.
Hey, but Jacob, there is no more important issue than education. We have to get this right in Alabama. It is my number one issue. So I'm so grateful and thankful that y'all have spent this much time on education. It is the most important issue that we have in Alabama. And how is it not the number one priority of every session, yet we never see that as the number one priority. So thank you for spending that much time on it, because I'm so passionate about it.
Absolutely. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to make sure that we got to it, is the mine workers down in Brookwood. About 1,000 of them have been on strike for a year with not a word from the current governor. One of our U.S. senators, Tommy Tuberville, he came to their union hall, came to their people, and groveled to them for an endorsement during an election. And he said that whatever happens, whether I win or lose, whether you endorse me or don't, you can call me, whatever you need, I'll be there for you. Well, since he's won his election, since they've been on strike, he has refused to answer their calls. During a hearing in D.C., where Senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, scheduled a hearing on private equity and what it's doing to workers in America, he had the opportunity to address Warrior Met in front of actual Alabama coal miners and the rest of the country. And instead of talking to them about why the CEO was able to retain his position after bankruptcy in 2015, why he got a $4 million raise, why the board of directors has stayed the same, why they gave the workers a $6 an hour pay cut, why they took away the pensions, why they took away significant parts of their health care. Instead of doing anything like that, instead of talking to them about why aren't they coming to the table and giving them a good deal, he literally read from a Warrior Met press release about how much the coal miners there make in Alabama, and which the facts on that have been disputed, and it's just very frustrating. You've got all these people that love to talk about coal miners, and we've got 1,000 of them here in this state, and nobody is talking about them. Nobody cares about them. These are folks. I've walked on the picket line with people in Trump hats, right? I mean, these are not, you've got varying, you've got black and white and liberal and conservative and Republican and Democrat. But most importantly to me is that they're working Alabamians, they're working folks, and they're fighting international private equity firms from New York and Australia and D.C. And, why does it take any effort at all to come to say, like, I support the coal miners instead of these people putting billions of dollars in their pocket? So, they've been restricted by county judges this whole time. On the picket line, they've been limited the number of people that can be on a picket line at once. It seems to me to be a legitimate freedom of speech issue, which we hear about that all the time, and it's never about the government. It's about this or that private company. But here we've actually got the government telling Alabama coal miners when and where and how they can speak. So if you were elected governor, what would you do for these Alabama coal miners? God forbid they're still on strike.
Well, surely, after coming up on 11, 12 months, right?
April 1st will be a year.
Right. And so it's so important that all workers are protected in their First Amendment rights. Are you for First Amendment, and are you for the Second Amendment? So, of course I am. I'm for all 25 amendments because it just so frustrates me, that we have weak, spineless politicians, Republicans included. I call them out, that don't stand up for our Constitution, don't stand up for our First Amendment rights and how important that is. And just for hey, I'm an everyday working guy. That's been my whole history. And certainly support, all of our workers in Alabama and how important that is. And so, I always want management, if you want to call it that, and labor to be able to work out solutions. And it seems like to me, from what I read, that labor has been willing to make concessions. So I don't understand why management isn't willing to make concessions also.
Do you think that, we've seen over the course of the history of this country, we've seen where strikes are long and drawn out. Secretaries of Labor, actually the U.S. Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, he brokered a deal between Kellogg's and the BCTGM union to end that strike. We've seen governors come to help mediate strikes in the past. Do you think that that's something that you would be willing to use the office of the governor to do, to call out what Warrior Met has been doing, to come out firmly on the side of the workers and to try to help mediate a good solution for the people of Alabama?
Absolutely. Again, I say in everywhere I go, every time I'm given the opportunity to speak, is I'm for unity. And I know that we're not always going to agree on every issue. I'm not trying to profess that we're ever going to agree on every issue, including labor and management. But certainly, in my role as governor, I'm working every day to be a unifier, to bring people together. How do we move Alabama together? I was meeting with a group of African American pastors today, and that was part of our conversation was racial reconciliation. Because why do we not ever bring that to light, and why are we scared to talk about that in Alabama? And sometimes it's union and management issues. Let's bring it to light. Let's get to the table that as governor, because I view that as a role. How do we resolve conflict, and how do we move the state forward? That's what I want to work for as governor of Alabama. And I sure appreciate you guys giving me the chance to talk about that some today.
Yep. Thanks for your time, Lew. I appreciate it. Where can people find out more about your campaign?
Lewin22.com. Thank you at the very beginning for pointing that out, Jacob. It's been a lot of fun. Hey, and please have me back, because I really enjoyed this dialogue. I always say I'm a good listener. I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to be for all Alabamians. Follow me on social media, Lewin22.com. Vote Lew for governor. Vote Lewin22 for governor on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And thank y'all again so much for having me.
Yep. Thanks for your time. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.